I'd be sitting with a client and they'd be experiencing something difficult, this interoception and reflection. Their eyes would go out the window and they're like, oh, I just saw a butterfly. And then I would write down in my notes, okay, so you are avoiding your pain. Okay. But one day I said, what if that's intelligent? And then I began to notice also that what their attention would go to outside often was an important aspect of what was happening inside. So this transformative experience they were on the cusp of, they like projected in a sense and found the external representation of that. We call it outsight, because their transformation from chrysalis to butterfly was happening. And then they found that butterfly out there.
Okay, Steve, welcome to the show. For anybody that has never heard of organic intelligence before, how would you explain it to them? And maybe a good question to ask here is, how would you explain this to a 10-year-old?
Yeah, well, I have had a 10-year-old and I've had to do that. But, the other place where I do this explanation is in like Ubers. When you grab an Uber and the driver says, hey, what do you do? And then you got like all of the science and all of the background and all the clinical experience and the psychology. You just sort of like take a bunch of stuff out and then see what you're left with. So I don't know if I'll be able to do it well now, but we'll take a shot at it nonetheless. Organic intelligence is just a way of relating to another human being so that their innate organizing and their innate ability to be better and function better and feel better begins to happen so that they realize it.
Fantastic. And I've heard you describe it elsewhere as the function of someone who's trained as an organic intelligence therapist is to sort of act like a midwife. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that metaphor and why you use it?
Thank you so much for your. And we use that term because, midwives are really clear, like they're not birth. They're helping a process that really wants to happen. And for us, we understand that the human biology also wants to do this process. It wants to actually grow its capacity. It wants to increase its bandwidth. It wants to be more resilient. But most of that has gotten missed because the world of therapy has kind of gotten a little distracted on becoming trauma informed, and they've lost the notion of being the midwife informed of our own innate intelligence and this biological trend to be better and grow better. It's absolutely genetically or evolutionarily designed that we would like heal and grow, we would increase our capacity. That's great. But everybody gets stuck on, fight, flight, and freeze, that we're, ending up, like being afraid of the saber-toothed tiger. And so we're always on edge or something like that. And so it's a trauma focus that actually increases people's inability to let their system grow and organize. It's called the negativity bias, right? So we become focused on what's wrong, and then we amplify intense associations and intense physiologies that further just either disorganize a system or they just keep it plain stuck.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think it's such a powerful metaphor. It really maybe puts more of the focus on the client as opposed to the therapist himself. So what would you say are the foundational principles that the OI approach is built upon?
Those I just mentioned, that there is a tendency in the human system to be focused on what's wrong. We call it the what's wrong attention, or in science, we call that the negativity bias. The attention is drawn toward what's wrong. But that's been misunderstood, I think, as, that's the evolution because, there were saber-toothed tigers and we're safer, by being all around like, what's going to eat me today, and like, that's going to keep me safe. that totally misses the point of our species, which is that we're this tribal species. We're not a solo creature out, naked and afraid in the woods, going, "Oh no, what's going to eat me now?" We're a group. We are some of the most fantastically communally organized folks in around the animal kingdom. So it's more like, we are part of a group. And if you like see a herd of gazelles, it's not like they're all up and looking around, they're all like eating their, munching on the grass. And then if one of them comes up and goes, then all the rest of them will go, "Okay, well, maybe we need to look around a little bit." It's the same way with us. Our evolution has designed that we will be safer and feel safer in our tribal groups, so that not everybody has to do that, or we can be, doing our thing and not be hyper vigilant about danger all the time. So that's the first principle, is that at this point there is the tendency of our system to look for what's wrong, because we're having a Nemo moment. We are not back in our original environment of hunter gatherers and our tribal connections. We're in the aquarium right now, and we kind of think like, maybe I belong in that bigger ocean out there. There's this inkling like, I don't maybe belong in this aquarium, but we're having a hard time finding our way out. And so the way out is the second principle, which is, not only are we attracted to what's wrong, is that, but that's not the only game in town. The other game in town, what we call the other side of things, the other attractor, is the organizing attractor. That is, our systems are made to heal at every level, at the physical level, at the emotional level, at the cognitive level. We're made to heal and grow at every level. And so we are, in organic intelligence, keeping our eye on what are the signals from that person, from their biology, from their body movements, from their emotions, from their conversations, the associations. We are looking and watching for what are the signals from that system that wants to grow our capacity, grow our problem solving ability, grow our bandwidth, in effect. And then all we do in our midwifery is just reflect those back to the individual in a way that their own signal can do what it's there to do, which is to grow that bandwidth and to increase capacity. It's really cool.
Fascinating. Now, you've been on this journey for decades, and I'm aware you originally trained in clinical psychology. So something I'm curious to ask you is, what did you have to unlearn to develop organic intelligence? What did you have to, unlearn?
Oh man, it was a lot. It was a lot. And this is the thing that I say to our coaches. My job is to make sure it doesn't take nearly as long for you as it took for me. Because I was trained in classic orthodox psychotherapy. So I was doing Freudian, what we call psychodynamic psychotherapy, looking for insight into the origins of people's neuroses and so on. And I ran away from from orthodox psychology to figure out the mind-body connection. What is this relationship between and I started to do Aikido. I started to train in somatics. I trained in the somatic world and somatic experiencing for 17 years, and began to really understand the link between the mind and the body. And so I had to unlearn that like when we are talking, it's not the meaning of what we're talking about that's most important. What's most important are the states underneath it. Like our brain is an elaborate, like a magnificently elaborate, city. And if you look at a map, you see the roads that are connecting the city, and then there are neighborhoods, and then in the neighborhoods there are buildings. And so what I began to realize is that we have to understand that map, and it's the associative nature of our brain and body, because what we're working with isn't the concepts, isn't the feelings, isn't the insight. It's actually the states underneath them. And so we're working directly with those associative states. And one of the things that I didn't have to unlearn was the work in a free association conversation. So this is quite direct, because if you want to work with the associations or the associational network of the brain and body that the person brings in, you have to talk with them in the way that they want to talk. Because if you say, now let's talk about your mother. Let's talk about your problem. Let's talk about your neurosis. Let's do some problem solving. Let's set your goals. Let's deal with your trauma. Let's deal with your background, right? All of lights up certain neighborhoods in that associational complex. And then you're just working in there. We're not after that. We're after seeing how the system wants to reconnect the roads of the neighborhoods, so that then there can be communication and movement freely among all the neighborhoods, and not just, setting one of the buildings on fire because, it hasn't worked out so well. So that's one of the big things that I have to learn. And one of the really for our coaches coming in, which is we have to figure out that the words and the meanings and the emotions are all a reflection of the underlying physiological states, and that there are certain states that are going to be more helpful and more supportive to do what I call to resync our psychology, to reorganize the brain and body. And so we train people to begin to recognize the big indicators of that self-organizational trend, and then learn to figure out the tinier ones. And when you get the ability to recognize the smaller, tinier signals of self-organization, and you get to reinforce those, then you're getting really good at the whole process. And like I'm talking about being able to see somebody take like just a slightly deeper and more spontaneous breath, right? Or to see a movement that goes from, being kind of jerky to a little smoother, to see how much of the attention can be free to come out into the environment, because that's the way that the brain needs to connect and map the physiology into what's coming up in the environment. So there are a host of skills that we have to learn. And the biggest one, like you're suggesting, which is unlearning that it's about the content of the words, or the meaning of the words, or the meaning of the behavior. Like understanding the meaning of that just that's just icing on the cake.
This is so interesting. It reminds me of, so we interviewed Pat Ogden, who developed sensory motor psychotherapy for this summit as well. And she was saying that maybe the most important thing in mental health is, like you're saying, it's not about the content of our experiences or focusing on those, but it's how we organize our experiences, and sort of having this broader overview of how we organize the contents of what's going on. So there's just an interesting link there.
Yep,
are there any,
and the only thing that I would change about that is that that we are concerned not with how we organize that the content, but how the content organizes. And that's the paradigm shift. That is, we are not going for organization, and as we look at the interpretation, say, of fMRIs and brain research, they're saying, when there's trauma and so on, the prefrontal cortex goes offline, and so the executive function is diminished. So what you need to do is to create better executive function, and you need to organize the way your brain is working. And to me, that's completely backwards, and isn't even really, I don't think, supported by all of the research. A lot of the research can say for many conditions, what is happening is that the prefrontal cortex, or the executive function, is overworked. So it doesn't need to do more. It actually learns how to do less. And that's our focus, is how our clients can do less and lean into the ease of recognizing what's coming from the system that's already supportive. So they don't actually have to do anything other than what we say is our mantra, which is the job is enjoyment. and that enjoyment of the support that's arising organically, innately, automatically, all the time. So that's a big shift.
That's beautiful. So it's almost like there's less of a focus on a controller of experiences or an organizer or an ego, and it's more about letting things naturally, organically heal themselves.
Yeah, yeah, and the OI mapping is quite complex because people come in, they can come in very disorganized, and so for those folks, you do have to provide structure, containment, and organization, so that then they have enough an orientation to then recognize what's actually valuable coming from their own system. So yes, we're going to be looking for in the end what's self-organizing, what's coming to us, but sometimes there has to be a lot of work to be able to get there.
I don't know if this is in any way linked or not, or any way relevant. It might not be, but it's springing to mind here now. So we did an online course on attachment theory and psychotherapy, and one of the things that was covered in that course was whenever, I think it was Mary Main, whenever she was trying to understand people's attachment styles, she was looking at pieces of writing that they were doing. And she realized whenever she was looking at them that it wasn't so much about the content of what they were talking about, it was how they expressed themselves. Like people that had an insecure attachment style were very short, to the point, it was very abrupt and finished. Whereas people that were secure were very expressive, and there was more linkages and more openness in the communication. So I don't know, that just came up. It just seems like it's a little bit, it's more organic, etc., etc. So yeah, any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, that's right on, right? That what you're looking at in, say, the attachment interview is the continuity of the narrative. It's not the content, but the continuity. And for us, continuity and the restoration of the continuity of states is exactly what our system is trying to do, and that we're messing with when we're working with trauma, because the continuity of states is created by the connection. It's like a scaffold or a ladder that connects from one step to the next step to the next step. These steps are intensity levels, but they're not only intensity levels, they're valence. Like if you have a negative valence, it'll tend to accelerate. If you're having a negative feeling, and then it accelerates because of the what's wrong attention amplifying it all. And so for us, we're finding that we have this free association conversation. Somebody brings up something and says, "Oh, I was just driving in my car. I was enjoying the song on the radio, and then bam, somebody next to me had an accident. It was really freaky, and I actually later began to shake about it." Now, most therapies would say, "Oh, like you looked over there and then you began to shake, or you saw that there was an accident." But we would go, "Oh, you're listening to the radio. What was on?" Because they were grooving to the song, which has interest and it has intensity, but it's positively valenced. And then that intensity grows in positive valence. It reaches its peak and then it comes down. And then the system will present another intensity, also positively valenced, just a step higher, that then the system comes up, reaches its threshold, and comes. And so that's what is our positive reinforcement framework, that the intensities come up and they do their intensity thing, and they do the traditional and paradigmatic pattern of acceleration, deceleration, but it's in positive valence and positive affect, positive sensation, and it's always there. And that's how our system wants to grow. And it grows in the ability to handle intensity by transitioning to a positive reinforcement framework, which is especially important when you're talking about addiction, because it's well known that like relapse and addictive process is associated with negative intensity and reaction to negative intensity. And we've just missed it. I think the therapeutic world, whether it's in the somatic world, that you had this, so you looked over and then you saw this accident. Oh, where do you feel that in your body? And it's like, oh, I feel this constriction in my body. That's backwards to us. It's like there is positive support, positive affect sensation, and everything, associations coming. And when the person is not addicted to what's wrong anymore, and they can actually feel and experience the intensity, it comes up and goes down. And it comes up and goes down, just like your respiration goes up and it comes down. It breathes and the heart rate increases a bit, and you exhale and it comes down. That fundamental rhythm, it's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. That fundamental rhythm is not negative, right? The basis of our whole physiology is in the easeful and even neutral or pleasant movement of acceleration, deceleration. And so that creates a totally different paradigm, which is why we're talking today.
Fascinating. Okay. What's coming to mind for me now, Steve, is this idea of synaptic pruning. And what I'm wondering is, when you come to a therapist and you exclusively focus on a trauma or some really intense issues, whatever, like you're creating more salience in that particular network. And if we think of the brain like a network that's sort of almost like a city that lights up whenever you bring attention to it, it seems like it could almost be counterproductive to do that. And we're essentially helping synapses connect and grow in that area every time we bring attention to them. So whenever am I right in saying, I might be way off, but am I right in saying that this approach is more about orienting the person towards pleasure and the positive aspects of their experience, and that helps them to grow and move like it prunes that those synapses that you don't want to be growing and really salient for them. Are we in the right ballpark here?
Pruning is learning. Also, it's when a neuron fires, what we know is it's likely to fire again. In other words, there is a reinforcement from that firing, and that helps us to automate what we do. So if you were a hurling fella, then like bounce the what do you call it?
It's called a slither.
You like bouncing the slither on your hurling stick there. It takes a little while. The first time you do it, it doesn't happen so much. Second time, maybe a little bit more. So you're learning, and they're learning a motor skill, hand-eye coordination, and so on. And so you're learning that, and you're growing that ability. But what that means really is there are certain synaptic pathways that are being amplified, and the others are not getting any juice. And so after a while, they'll just kind of wither away if you don't use them. And then you become really adept. Like athletes are really adept at their work because they don't have so many options in some way. It's all in the groove of their performance. So that's ultimately what we do when we're trying to facilitate also the organization of a neurobiology, which is we are amplifying the impulses that represent the ideal in the learning of the ideal intensity oscillation. The learning of the ideal intensity oscillation. So if I am breathing in, heart rate goes up. I breathe out and it goes down. And there is acceleration to a threshold, and then it comes down. And then what our systems have is a limitation on that intensity, which means anything over, say, that threshold, then I've got to start coping. because then it's uncomfortable. I'm having an aversive experience. It's just too intense. I've got to put my sunglasses on. I've got to wear my coat indoors. I've got to restrict the information coming into my system because its bandwidth has been limited by that threshold. And so we work to grow those thresholds because that's what the system wants to do, so that when you grow those thresholds, the intensities that used to be like over threshold, all of a sudden are below threshold, and they're easy. Then the biology can manage that. I don't have to cope with it. Like if you live in the city, sometimes you're going, oh, the sound is too much, the horns honking. Other times you might be just like, oh, I didn't even hear it. What are there cars out there? Right? Like that's a way of operating where the system is not misdetecting threat, for instance. And that can happen if your range is higher. If your bandwidth is more, the brain can detect, oh, that's a non-significant impulse. We're just going to let it go. And it can then begin to prune the unnecessary reactions that are happening in relationship to the environment. So that's the sense that I'm thinking about, and it highlights a couple of key ideas from OI that we were talking about before. One of which is that there is an organic intensity threshold. That's the sweet spot. That's the learning spot. If you get that, then it wants to grow another level and another step and build that scaffolding. It's like having a 1 kilo weight, and you lift that and the muscles go, yeah, okay, I got that. Give me a kilo and a half. Like next day, you're like kilo and a half. And then the next day, maybe kilo 8, and it's the sweet spot. It grows. And it's a perfect training effect by learning what the ideal intensity threshold is. And the good news is your biology knows it, wants to find it. Bad news is your therapist can't find it for you. We can only set up the conditions that will allow the system to return to its natural relationship to especially positive intensity. And we grow thresholds through positive intensity, not through negative intensity so much. It's absolutely the opposite of like no pain, no gain. You got to get to the core of your trauma. You got to find out what it is. You got to do the exposure therapy, all of which has its place. I'm not saying that we need to throw everything out. I'm just saying we need to add this level of how our biological systems want to grow. And it is, I think, probably obvious to us if we think about it. It's through support and ease and pleasure and safety and enjoyment. The channel of pleasure is not like a hedonic idea. It's the evolutionarily designated channel that says this is good. So a bee sees the yellow flower and it experiences pleasure. And it goes toward it. It's the approach side of the approach avoidance thing. And meaning that there is a neurobiological impulse that says, go toward that. We call that pleasure. And that's how we relate socially, our essential task. That's how we pass on our DNA into the future, right? That's how we have conversation. Literally, all of the good stuff is coming up through pleasure, so that we grow thresholds, and ultimately it becomes pleasurable to experience everything. And this is where we're now overlapping with like mindfulness and ancient traditions, because the point of all of this is to be able to have equanimity around everything and to experience everything. Anger and hatred and lust and pain and not be like thrown off by it. It's like, yeah, that's part of the human experience. I need my grief. I love my grief, and I'm going to have it and enjoy it. And that can happen if we grow the bandwidth so that we're not challenged by that kind of experience anymore. But it happens through positive reinforcement and the growth of intensity thresholds through positive experience.
So yeah, we had a brief chat, and I was sort of saying, when I hear this, and the more I sort of learn about this approach, like this really is a complete shift in paradigm from what were the usual mode of healing and looking at human psychology in general. And I think the name organic intelligence is it's perfect, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this woman or not, but again, this is very random. It just comes to mind, but she's called Lisa Miller. She's at the University of Columbia. I think she's head of their first ever science and spirituality program there. But one of the things she was talking about is this idea that whenever the brain enters into a deep meditative state, the brain frequency that comes online there, it's like, I think it's alpha, or I'm not sure what it was. But anyway, what I found really interesting is that this frequency is pretty much the same frequency that is given off by the Earth at like it's like a few miles down towards its core. It's called the Schumann's constant, I think, and I just that to me is so interesting because, like, we are essentially part of nature, and whenever when we get the conditions right, it just naturally sort of happens. So, question following on from that, what are the conditions that lead to organic intelligence and what's the word used? Auto
organization. Yeah. So it's absolutely key because it's a fundamental principle that our coaches get, which is this principle from complexity science. And we don't. So the principle from complexity science is under the right conditions, certain systems will become self-organizing. So the question of what those conditions are is absolutely important. And I came at this kind of sideways because I was teaching, like Pat Ogden and Peter Levine really developed together, Peter somatic experiencing and Pat the sensory motor. And so they are, and I was teaching in the SE world, and I was having this issue because I saw sometimes it worked really well, and sometimes it seemed like the session was really good, but then people kind of fell out and they fell off. Like sometimes the sessions were really organizing, and sometimes they were not, and maybe even harmful. And this we know from the literature and psychotherapy that there are underreported, underinvestigated adverse effects from treatment. And so I became really interested in what is that and how can we create a system that is much safer for people. Yeah, much safer for people. And so I began to implement a different kind of protocol. Because we were taught originally, you're going to sense the body. The question is always more or less, where do you feel that in your body? And it's through sensation. And I began to find that people could begin to stabilize more, not by interoception or by having the attention withdrawn to the internal world, to sensation or to emotion, for that matter, or to thought, but to actually bring the attention into the external world. And so I call that orientation as connecting to the environment through the senses. And it works really well because, as neuroscience is telling us now, the brain is the predicting brain. The brain isn't just trying to keep everything, stable and homeostatic. It's actually trying to get us ready for what's coming and does prepare us for what's coming. But in order to do that, it has to take into account the internal environment, which it does automatically, and then the external environment. When people's internal environment is constantly, like shining the light of attention on the internal world while the system is doing the what's wrong attention, all you're doing is like, shining the light on all the zombies down in the cellar. You're going to wake them up. Don't do that. Like don't go into the cellar. Just look into the external world. to bring the senses, I call it coming back to our senses. And when people began to do that, they begin to settle more and they begin to feel easier. And if you want, we could even practice that for a moment here. But the system begins to relax, and it relaxes because the brain is able to be helped in doing what it wants to do, which is to build the bridge between the physiology, the body, and the environment. And the bridge can be the bringing of the senses back into the environment. And again, this is a massive paradigm shift, because in therapy and even sometimes in meditation, the idea is to bring internal awareness, like understand your thoughts, feel your feelings, have sensations and in awareness, and all of these internally focused things. And again, that is secondary for us to the ability to find the ways that the system wants to connect to the environment through the senses. And again, this happened completely spontaneously in some ways, which was that I'd be sitting with a client, and they'd be experiencing something difficult. Back in the day, I was working more traditionally, and they'd be having this intense experience. And then in the midst of this intensity and this interoception and reflection, their eyes would go out the window and they're like, oh, I just saw a butterfly. And then I would write down in my notes, okay, so you are avoiding your pain, okay, and they're displacing, and anyway, all of those defenses. But one day I said, what if that's intelligent? What if that really makes sense? And so I just looked, and I'm like, oh yeah, that butterfly is happening out there. And we began to do that together. And then I began to notice also that what their attention would go to outside often was an important aspect of what was happening inside. So this transformative experience they were on the cusp of, they projected in a sense and found the external representation of that. We call it outsight, because their transformation from chrysalis to butterfly was happening. And then they found that butterfly out there, right? And that's how the system is bringing us together. That's the integration, the connection of the neural networks, and it's brilliant. We are brilliant.
That's beautiful. And the penny, I think, maybe really dropped for me about the power of your approach. Whenever, I think you said elsewhere that we get stuck very easily. And one of the reasons why that happens is because our brains are essentially these prediction machines. And the world that we see, the world that we experience, is a combination of sensory signals from the environment, but also our brain's best predictions about what caused those signals. So if you've had a really traumatic past, then your predictions are going to be based on that traumatic past. But whenever you are doing this practice of orientation, you're essentially creating new maps and new models. You're taking the attention away from the predictions, and you're actually mapping the reality, as opposed to sort of forcing your brain or getting your brain stuck in its usual patterns, where it's sort of expecting to see its prior expectations and beliefs. Does that make sense?
That's brilliant. That's so well said, and so important, because if we're going to be working, say, with what's called developmental trauma, then you're exactly right. The brain has been shaped and molded to have those predictions happen and to expect certain things from the environment, from the social environment, from the relationships, and so on. And the idea, the brain is ready to shift its model. And it's always comparing and trying to compare the internal model with the input that's actually coming. And so that's what we're hoping, is by getting into the environment and allowing the senses to give actual feedback about this moment, then your brain can begin to adapt its models, because what's coming in doesn't match the expectation. And it's completely adaptive, completely normal that we would begin to change the model. The brain would begin to change its expected model.
Fascinating. So we've gone quite a while here with that. Actually, with this topic's on addiction. We haven't even touched base there. So the question I want to ask here is, what is the unique contribution that organic intelligence can make to our understanding of addiction and our approach to treating it?
Yep. Yep. There's a paper on our website, organicintelligence.org, that you can download, and it's a free download, and it gives all of the science behind that. And what it says is that this positive reinforcement framework, set within the context of orientation, is an important contribution to the world of treatment. I think that the orientation is really key. We have OI coaches who have been working in treatment centers, people working in, like with people who are detoxing, some of the most chaotic systems that you're going to see coming in detox. And this natural conversation that we have, the free association conversation, where we are hearing the insistent impulse from every single biology to become more organized, is really helpful for people. And we are, as coaches, we're really attuned. We learn first that attunement so that we can be flexible enough to hear what's coming from that person's system and then reflect it back in a way that is able to be received. And sometimes it's just not there. I mean, sometimes the person does not have the capacity to receive back that positive feedback. And all they want, and all that we provide, is just somebody to hear them, right? So the relationship itself, really just being with another person, is absolutely the beginning of this whole thing. We're not running like, oh, just feel good, or just feel positive, or just, realize your resources or something. We're really being with the person as they need in the moment, and providing the support. We are building the relational vehicle first, because if you're not with the person in the same vehicle, you don't really have a lot of room to do anything. So I think that's one thing, and it's built on this orientation as connecting to the environment through the senses, and then this orientation toward pleasure. We know that in addiction, it's about the reward systems and what is going to be rewarding, and the reward systems get jacked up by negative reinforcement, or and negative feedback. Like, it's the addiction cycle it's called negative reinforcement, which is the intensity comes up, it comes over the threshold of what feels good. Like, you think of a craving. So a person addicted is having a craving. Okay, now I'm having this craving. I shouldn't use. I don't want to use. It gets me in trouble. This will kill me one day. I should call my sponsors. But the impulse is still there, and the intensity with each of those kinds of thoughts is increasing and increasing until they use again, and then it comes back. And then the conflict goes away, and they use, and the conflict is gone. They use and they feel better, right? And that's the condition of negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is, it feels better after it felt worse first, right? So you make the bad thing go away, and that's negative reinforcement. And then the person is drawn right back into the same cycle of negative anticipation, negative reaction, craving, and over again, because that reinforces the condition that just happened. And it's meant to work really well. Like, if you're thirsty and then you drink water, that like aversive feeling goes away. It's really good for linking up survival-based behaviors. It's not good for living, and it's especially bad with addiction. And it's negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement says it feels better after it felt worse first. But if you think about it, that again is the therapy paradigm. You talk about your problem, you talk about the issue, you talk about your past, and then somehow you feel better. You get the empathy, you get the understanding, you get the insight, you get the coping skills, or you get the ice cream after the session, right? Whatever, you feel worse, and then you feel better. And it just reinforces those states over and over again. And that's negative reinforcement. For us, we're shifting, and the system wants to shift into a positive reinforcement state, like breathing in and breathing out. Which is better? The breathing in, breathing out? They're both just really good. That's the positive framework. Oh, I enjoy the excitement and interest, and then I relax and I enjoy the come down. It's coming up and going down. It's fun going up. It's fun going down. Anybody who has been on a swing as a child knows exactly how this works.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So what might a positive reinforcement approach to addiction treatment look like then in practice? How might someone, let's say one of your coaches is working with someone struggling with an addiction, how might they help them through that process?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's key because it begins all with attunement. It begins all with that relationship. People have to know that their therapist doesn't think their model is more important than their client. Right. So the attunement and being with a person exactly where they are, being having the inner flexibility to be with somebody wherever they are, that's what's needed. And that's the very first step of the process. And then from there, we're just talking. We're just having conversation, and maybe we're walking and talking, and maybe even outdoors where the attention goes out, and I may become really interested in the way the breeze is moving through the trees, or the way the light is shining in a certain way, or the way that the wind feels on the face. In other words, our coaches are also modeling an interest in the attention coming naturally out into the environment. But honestly, we're not trying to influence a person so much as to reflect back to them the fact that the client too will be having those experiences, because the brain is always trying to bring itself back online in a better way so it can make those more accurate predictions and live in the world. So you're taking a walk with somebody and you're being empathetic for their struggles, and we will hear always that there are going to be counterpoints, there are going to be resources, there are going to be skills, and there's going to be the world about. And then we're just going to be more interested in that than in the what's wrong, in the context of being mostly interested about the human being that we're with.
One of the things I love that you say is you're taking the focus away from what's wrong to what is, and that seems to be the power of orientation. In that paper you wrote, in the conclusion, you mentioned that if you want people just to get one takeaway from the paper, it was that you don't want to overwhelm clients. You want to just, instead of focusing on the window of tolerance, you want to focus on the window of enjoyment. Can you tell us a bit more about this and why this is so important?
Yes, it's really that key step of like understanding the difference between negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. In the context of like addiction, it's overwhelm, but it's also any aversive experience can trigger relapse behaviors, and it's the negative feedback that happens, and that is most notorious among people that are addicted, is that negative patterns re-evoke negative states that lead to using again. So that positive reinforcement frame is really key, but it happens in a very gradual way. We call it it's a shaping paradigm of positive reinforcement, which means it just happens little by little, but it happens within this context. I think maybe this is the other biggest takeaway, which is this. Carl Rogers called it unconditional positive regard. That is, we know and we learn by just repeated experience that each and every person has this wholeness that is being expressed in ways that they don't even know yet. But that wholeness is unaffected. And it's always there. And so when I am working with somebody and I am seeing that person in terms of that wholeness, that kind of messaging is pretty powerful. No matter what particular intervention may come from it, it really starts right there. And it means that I am enjoying being with every single client. I mean, some are harder, some are easier, but among the people that are there, I am seeing that wholeness and holding that wholeness and reflecting it back until they get it themselves.
Wow.
Makes
Okay.
it easier for the therapist as well, by the way.
A huge part of this approach is based on complexity science and also oscillations, which I don't quite understand. So maybe could you tell us about, I think it's, you said like the first commandment is oscillations. What can you tell us a bit about that first commandment and why that's important too?
Yeah, I've mentioned it today because our systems are all oscillating, like your cells are oscillating, meaning that a nerve cell, it fires, it goes up to its threshold, and then it comes down. And so all of your system is a system of synced systems around oscillations. So the heart's pacemaker, the sinoatrial node, is about 10,000 cells, and they're all learning to. They all learn, and there's a basic reinforcement pattern that helps them all tick at the same time. So synchrony and biological synchrony is a science that's becoming more and more understood. And the oscillations means the millions, billions of cells are learning to work collaboratively in a rhythmic pattern. And from small to large, like it can be, yeah, as small as the 10,000 nerve cells and the sinoatrial node, or the larger systems, like the systems of waking and sleeping, right? Like the circadian rhythms of being awake during the day and asleep during the night. So all of that is meant to be synced up, and those are all oscillations. Like I'm more active during the day and I'm more quiet at night. That's an oscillation, up and down. We breathe in, heart rate increases. We breathe out, heart rate decreases. And that kind of rhythm is an organizing rhythm that organizes all other systems. It's like, the conductor who comes up and says and gives you that, and then all the cells are listening to that. It's like, okay, let's get that rhythm. Let's play all together, and the jazz happens. And it's magic.
Very cool. Very cool. Can you tell me about niche coma karma?
Yeah, yeah. Um, And Nishkam karma is a Sanskrit term that I heard when I was in graduate school from one of my teachers, and it means something really simple, which is that when our biology begins to resync, what happens is that we just become more human, and in some ways, just become more ordinary. We are just human, just natural. It's organic intelligence. It's not artificial intelligence, right? It is us becoming and expressing and enjoying our nature, which is by nature like affiliative and fun loving, and like we love, and we have compassion, and we care about other people because we're tribal, right? All of that is there. And when that begins to really sync up, and that when that really begins to sink in also, then I begin to just express that naturally, and I become responsive and responsible to life. And I am unperturbed about or uninterested in the consequences. It's just the joy of expression. And that's getting toward Nishkama karma. Nishkam karma means to do one's duty, to respond spontaneously, but without attachment to the outcome. Without attachment to the outcome. So that's Nishkama karma. It takes a little while, I reckon.
That's beautiful. It sort of reminds me of there's a guy. He was like a spiritual teacher. He's called Anthony DeMello, and he would say that happiness is our natural state. And he would say, if you don't believe that, like just look at children. Like children are happy, like they're genuinely like they're running about, they're playing, they're happy, they're exploring the world. And it's only whenever we get so much cultural conditioning and so many attachments that this starts to get taken away from us. And it seems your approach, it's helping people rediscover that natural state within them that is pleasurable and that is happiness, and that's beautiful. That's something great to be moving towards. So just a couple of questions now to wrap up. If you could get a letter to anybody in the world struggling with an addiction, what might be the key points that you would include in that letter?
Don't give up. Don't give up. People who have had as extreme situation as you have made the change, have gotten better, that help is out there, and you will often feel like it's not, and don't believe that feeling. Those would probably be some of the most basic messages that I would send. Yeah. And the beautiful thing is there are programs that are absolutely free, like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, absolutely free. People aren't making money off of it. It's being a support, and we're getting better at understanding addiction. And they're the field of doctors in the medical field are becoming better at helping on this. It's getting better all the time. Our own treatments are getting better. So, back in the day, I was doing research and also active in the field of HIV, and for people who had HIV before, like the cocktails came around and AZT and others. And the idea there was, and people would encourage each other with this idea of live to the cure, just live to the cure. And so really it's one day at a time, and the improvement is coming. Sometimes it's one day at a time is too much. Sometimes it's like one breath at a time. And so if we can bring the attention into the environment and hold on to anything, we could call it any port in a storm, like anything that will get you to the next day, especially if you've attained sobriety. That's absolutely brilliant. It can come, it can happen. So that's what I would say. Some word of hope like that.
Fantastic. Okay, so like there are going to be mental health professionals watching this, and they're going to be super curious to learn more about organic intelligence and maybe take trainings, and they want to learn more. So where can someone like that go after this conversation to maybe take a deeper dive and learn more?
Well, I think the first place to go is out into the environment through the senses. I think that's the first place to go, because all we're talking about is what everybody at some level already knows. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then we have our website is organicintelligence.org. Be in touch. I'd be happy to have conversations with people. And we have an international community. We have over 100 countries represented. We love our members, and we love that there is a diverse community around this, and a lot of amazing people. It's sort of it's kind of a bodhisattva school, like people who care about people who care about life on the planet come together, and we support each other. So our mantra is the job is enjoyment. And then we just get better at that. And it makes for a really exciting community of empowerment. Because when your system is fueled by joy and pleasure and service, you don't burn out, and you really enjoy what you do, and you're energized. And that's sustainability. And honestly, things are so bad right now in general. We don't have time to burn out anymore. We have a lot of activists working with us. We don't have time to burn out. And I know none of the helping industry, none of the helping professionals have time to burn out, but especially because the need is so great right now. If you look around the world, in Ukraine, or any place, really, any place you look, the suffering is off the chain. We need to be able to be swarthy and sustainable and have the perspective and the tools to be able to be of service and to be able to let go of the agenda of our own success so that we can be more in that niche karma, simply expressing the enjoyment of living, which is the greatest signal of all. Organic.
Reminds me of something else I've heard you say, is that when we are of service, we are served, or something along those lines, which is I think is a very powerful statement. But Steve, I'm going to let you go. Before you do, I just want to say, I get to meet a lot of people doing a lot of different approaches to therapy in what I do, like loads. But I really get the sense that you're onto something really important and really paradigm shifting here. So I just want to wish you the absolute best going forward with what you're doing, and just keep going, and yeah, all the best.
Thank you so much. And thank you. This conversation will probably help a lot, and really appreciate your generosity and presence. Thank you. It's a gift.